Pierre-Christophe Gam. I'm a visual artist and the founder of Toguna World, which is an art and foresight research platform. And essentially what we do is to investigate a desirable future from the global African perspective. I have the pleasure today of facilitating this conversation with Sename, Koffi, Agbodjinou, and Tracee Worley. And essentially what we're going to be looking at is different case studies of how the future is investigated from the global African diaspora. So let me just start. I want to say as well before I start, thank you for DFF for facilitating this gathering. I'm looking forward to exchanging further with you all. The name of this conversation is called The Global Mapping of Dream. And it stems from an investigation that I've been working on for the last 5 years. And essentially it started from the question of who gets to imagine the future. We are in a moment globally of acceleration when it comes to the question of the future. We look at the different propositions that are happening from across the world. There is ideas of a full tech, full AI future. We can see what is happening in the US when you think about the current administration, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. We hear about dark enlightenment, techno-feudalism. You have all of this very worrying and vision of dystopian future. And there is a way as if the future is already decided and determined. And the only options that we have as the general public is either to fully embrace it and jump to it or hope for the best, right? There's a sense as if you don't have any agency. And right now, the conversation on the future is being determined and designed by Silicon Valley and by global finance, which is a big problem because who gave them the authority to decide for our collective future? When we look in terms of demographic projection, Africa is positioned to become the most populated continent by the next century, and in particular with Nigeria becoming the most populated country in the world just before India, and then shortly followed by China. So to me, it became very important to ask the question of the future from the African perspective, and really to investigate how is the future dream on the continent. In order to facilitate this conversation, I started to first ask myself the question of what is our reality? Before we ask the question of the future, what is our reality? And in order to get into that, what we tend to lose sight of is that the world, so what is the world? What is the reality, right? The world is a big rock floating in outer space. If you just step back and look at it from the cosmos, from space. And what we call our reality, what we call our material reality, what we see as our civilization and our system, all of this stem from human imagination, right? So what is our reality? We have nature, we have the visible and invisible aspect of physics, right? And as well, we always have to remember that what we can see with our eyes is only 1% of everything that exists around us. But everything else that we see as the limit of reality is nothing more than the materialized imagination of people across time and place. A lot of the things that we take for granted, that we see as final limits of reality, all started as ideas and propositions. When you think about money, is a social construct, right? And now we're even moving into a stage where we're speaking about money as something digital. So there's a lot of things that we see as final that are just proposition. And so ultimately, if you look at it, the foundation of our reality is the imagination. So if you want to have an honest and fully expanded conversation on the future, I identify the fact that we have to investigate the imagination and we have to create tools that enable us to expand the scope of our imagination. And so this is how I came to this platform. So I've designed a methodology of foresight called the Future Dreaming, the Future Dreaming Ritual that is informed by a spiritual tradition from the Yoruba called Ifa. And Ifa is a science, it's a philosophy, and it's a divination system. And the goal of Ifa is to explain, so Ifa posits the fact that everything that exists in our world stems from energy, the world, the physical world, humans, but then our reality is a co-creation between humans and nature. So essentially, everything starts from the mind, and the materials stem from the imagination. And in the context of Ifa, there's 5 layers for which, as humans, we're able to co-create with nature. And this essentially defines the methodology, the framework of the workshop that I've designed. So over the last 5 years, I've been hosting workshops, installation across Africa. And so you can see some of the visual about some of this workshop. As well, I designed an immersive platform called the Sanctuary of Dream as well, where participants are able to engage through dreaming rituals. This exists, as you saw before, as a virtual environment, but as well in the context of physical installations. These are recent iterations, and the context has changed, but essentially it's a space through which we can have fully embodied, fully present conversation on the future that very much centers our desire, our core desires in regards to the conversation of the future. So we look at 5 questions. How will we eat, play, dream, pray, and love in the context of the future? But the first criteria is that how would you like to feel in each of these scenarios? So we center the feelings, and obviously positive feelings, ideally, in this visioning. Through this process, we have been able to engage with about 12,000 participants from across the diaspora. I've been working since last year with an organization called African Rising, which is a network of civil society organizations from across Africa. And what is remarkable with them is that it's a network of organizations from Egypt all the way down to South Africa that focus on different topics, that brings together experts, teachers, students, farmers. So it just has expanded across rural and urban space, and they have about 44,000 members. And so through them, we've been engaging in this exercise, and we've been creating network of dream circles across Africa. And the goal of this investigation is to start bringing forward alternative visions and scenarios of the future. Because right now, there is a kind of struggle in our ability to imagine. We feel stuck. We all feel confused and uncomfortable with the direction of things. But there is a sense of general apathy and a sense of lack of agency collectively felt. And the goal of this exercise is that let's move beyond just from a conversation from a place of reaction to what we don't like, but let's start having conversation about what we like. What are the values that are important to us, and how do we envision society? So I invite all of you to go on togunaworld.com to explore this further. Thank you very much. So I will going to pass the mic to Tracee, and she's going to speak about a project, and then we have in Sename, then we have expanded conversation.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracee Worley. I run a speculative design studio called Radical Futures. I'm a designer, and we use design fiction and speculative design to help communities really feel what is coming before it arrives. And this image you see on the screen is of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the United States. And this is a community that I did some speculative design work in. In the 1920s, this was one of the most prosperous Black neighborhoods in the United States. There was an oil boom in Tulsa, and many people, gained wealth during this time. So this image that you see is of the Greenwood district. However, when the oil boom started to decline in 1921, it led to a lot of racial tension, and there was a race massacre that happened over a period of 24 hours, and this neighborhood was burned to the ground. There were 35 blocks of the city that were burned. Anywhere from 30 to 100 people were killed, and this is very much an open wound in this community. So I joined up with a couple other of organizations who were working with a community group who were charged with deciding what to do with 56 acres of land that the city was giving back to the community. And the person who called me in knows that I'm a speculative designer, and she was like, I think we really need you here because we're asking people to imagine what this community will be in 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, and I'm having a really hard time because people don't feel safe to imagine. Because of the trauma that had happened in this community, there was a lot of pessimism and an idea that things will kind of always be the way that they have been. So in this photo here, these are members of the community group. We were going around telling stories, talking about the kinds of future that they were longing for. Another thing I think that happens in the aftermath of that kind of violence, even though no one in that room had experienced it, they were all descendants of people who had experienced that violence. Not only did it shrink the imagination, but it created factions within the community. So there wasn't 100% alignment as to what people were longing for. People were actually in conflict with each other. So I used some storytelling tools to get people to talk about the kind of future that they were longing for. And doing that storytelling that was asking them to think outside of their logical brains, what we discovered is that people wanted the same thing. People who thought that they were in conflict with each other, or I don't trust the city officials. For the most part, people were longing for the same futures. Because of this history of Black Wall Street, another thing that we did was kind of reimagine what Black wealth meant. It wasn't only the literal capital that Black people have, but other things like your values, community, taking care of one another. And one of the most exciting things that we did was we created some speculative artifacts from the future. Because it was so hard to imagine, how do we get from what we have today to where we want to go, we created newspaper articles and zines. We created a fictitious organization to allow people to really step into that future that they were longing for. And it all culminated with a beautiful manifesto that captured what the community had set as its values. And now there is a community development corporation, which is a legal vehicle that is set up to manage that 56 acres of land into the far future. So a lot of that groundwork was done in this kind of dream space.
Do you hear me? Hello, 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 hello.
Hello? I think your mic is off, yeah.
Hello, hello.
Attends, ils sont en train de switcher.
Allô,
Go for it.
allô, allô.
Just pousse ta voix.
Allô.
C'est bon? Yeah.
Ah, okay. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, Pierre-Christophe, and secondly, apologize for my English, which is not too good. Yes, what we would like to share with you is an experiment we are trying to pushing in Lomé, Togo, West Africa. But I will just want first to maybe explain what is the idea behind this experimentation. What we try to do with this project called UpCity is to tackle what for me is the problem of our time. The problem of our time is the paradigm. Any solution we try to develop, we didn't do well because we developed solutions staying in the hegemonic paradigm we are all sharing right now. And to try to tackle the paradigm itself, what I suggest is to make a sort of counter-history of the paradigm. So first, to name the paradigm, you can call it capitalism, paradigm of profits. I prefer to name it paradigm of separation. I will explain why with this counter story I would like to share with you. So what I try to communicate is to see the modernity, which is the things who give birth to this paradigm, as a series of separation. The modernity philosophers have this contract to emancipate human in the Europe of 18th. But they confuse the project of emancipate human from the reality of this specific time in Europe with emancipate human of the constraints or the organical reality or the organical world. So philosophers decided to emancipate human from the constraints of the organical reality. And for doing that, they developed a series of separation. The first separation was this idea that humans should be separate from the nature to achieve his potential, what in France we call naturalism. And the naturalism was the very first, very not counterintuitive proposition developing in Europe and who is not shared in any other geography. Yeah. after this first separation, European thinkers think also about separation with the group. After separate yourself from the nature, you are not emancipated completely. You need to separate yourself also from the group, because the group is still an organical constraint in your life. And there is another separation they idealize, but they cannot activate it, which is the separation with your body. If you want to be a full human, after separate yourself from the nature and from the group, you need to separate also yourself from the body, who is still organic, you know. But they don't have, at this time, the potential to achieve this last separation. And what is happening now is that today we have the possibility to achieve the project of the modernity. So the modernity is becoming very radical, because he see that he have the tools to achieve his potential. And for the modernity to be able to achieve these potentials, it will come by Africa, because Africa is the only place you can think about the three ethereal, the three separation, because the biggest cities in the world will pop up in these continents, and the city is the best tool to coalesce three levels of non-organic way of seeing the world. So Africa is in the global mapping of the paradigm we are living in today, the place in which we can change our reality for a very ethereal one. But Africa, it is the good news, is also the place who have the most potential to corrupt this project. Yeah, to disrupt it. Because of many things, but I would just want to list two. The first one is, of course, the youth. It is the biggest resources of young energies, but it is also the biggest resources of alternative paradigms, organic paradigms, paradigms in which you can, paradigms who don't host any separation. If you take all our African cosmogony, cosmogony is a sort of matrice who projects the human societies in this way that any action of the human societies should not separate the human community from the nature, and a human community people from another people, and your body is also considered to be a contrast. So what are we trying to do with this project UpCity is to connect those two resources, the very young potential of the continent and the remanescence, the remain of those organic way of representation of the world. And I don't have the time to explain it in detail, but you can find a lot of resources on the web, and I will answer question if they have some.
So thank you very much. I think you can maybe explain UpCity, expliquer un peu UpCity.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, just in a few words, UpCity project is a sort of smart city project, but an alternative for what the modernity see the smart cities. And we try to disrupt the main way of seeing the smart city by saying that a smart city is a screed and a layer. The screed is a very material production of the cities, and the layer is all those digital technologies who will be embedded in the material aspect. So we tried to corrupt the two level. How can we produce material cities but not hosting separation? Producing cities in which humans are not separate from nature. I am not separate of you, so I cannot see you as a utilities. So I avoid all the capitalist way of seeing the world. And I'm not separate of my body, so I cannot host any way of making money with the fact that I'm fixed, you know. And also, so we develop the material aspect, but also the technological aspect, so that those two levels don't host any aspect of this way of seeing the world as a separate construction, so that both of them can be ideally embedded. And we do it by create a lot of small labs in the territory, and each labs developed for his environment. Yeah, the tools. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. So building on what you were talking about, this separation from the mind, from the body, from us, from nature, then from the community, and then ultimately from the body with transhumanism. And the fact that now there are tools that could potentially bring us into this project, that is a long and vision project. And eventually there are even people that speak about even overcoming our biology together to upload ourselves into some AI server hosted somewhere in the US. What is interesting is that when you think about the global African diaspora, but as well as other communities, like you were saying, other paradigms from across the world, is that there's a fundamental understanding that as humans, we exist. I mean, in Africa, there's the Ubuntu concept, which means I am because you are. And in the Ifa tradition, which is the framework that I use in the context of my workshop, is the fact that as humans, we exist within interconnected communities, but that the reality of what we experience in the world is more than just a physical experience, but is as well the invisible. And that all of this is part of how we create the world. There is a global push right now for limiting our imagination, our capacity to envision as a system. And there is a sense as if the current system has always been. The kind of neo-capitalist system has always been. And I think what we lose sight is that the project that was, the kind of social construct that came after the Second World War is being actively destroyed, dismantled, in order to give way for another project. What I find interesting, and I think I want to go into what are the visions that came through our individual research and what are the alternative visions, which I think is very important to share. But what is interesting is that this project, when you think about dark enlightenment, techno-feudalism, they are all stemmed from social Darwinism ideology that sees humans as programmable machines. And it's very much when you speak about the separation of the body, nature, the mind, and community as a whole, that sees humans as machines that can be programmed, that can be controlled, that can be measured and quantified with data, and eventually that can be overcome. And that's why, you have this, false idea of intelligence, artificial intelligence, that try to equate human intelligence with machine algorithmic processes. In the context of the work that we've been doing, I think what was interesting is that, because when you start doing this kind of investigation, you don't really know what you're going to find. And you start from, to me, it was very much about, let's look at ancient models, let's look at historical technology, I would say, of facilitating conversation, of facilitating divination system, and then let's see what comes from it. And what was interesting to me is that through this research, I was able to really have a different relationship even with technology. We live in a moment in which we are conditioned by society like children, in the sense of we don't know where our food comes from. And this is a very recent outcome. We do not know where our food comes from. We have no understanding of the medicine we take in our body. We have no understanding of the technology we utilize. All of these things are outsourced, produced, developed by others, and we are just consumers. All of that is presented by convenience, but the main problem of our time is that the fact that we are disempowered in being fully, you're talking about local communities, that people that are fully embedded in the reality of the environment. The issue that we have right now is that we are dislocated from our own reality, from the world, and from our communities. And what was coming in the context of the result from the investigation, everything that was coming was about local. Being connected to local community, having a full understanding of the food we eat, having a full understanding as well of the medicinal aspect of the food. Food as energy, food as sociological aspect of food, as pleasure, etc. But as well, food being produced locally, and understanding that as humans we exist as part of ecosystem. And the other thing as well that was coming through the research was even basically a future, to summarize, of people that will be farmers, that will know how the food is produced, that will know where the food comes from, that will understand resilient crops. The issue that we have right now is not that nature is limited, is that nature is controlled and is centralized by organized monopoly. That are very recent outcome. So that will be a future of people that will be farmers, that will know how to produce the food, that will be fully empowered by the subsistence need, that will be produced in communities, and the futures of people that will be hackers. meaning that the technology in the way that it is done today is outsourced. And I remember a small anecdote, I grew up in France, and I remember in the late 90s, there was a whole campaign organized by the French government to digitalize and to introduce the internet. And what was interesting is that we were all in high school at that time. We all have very open, malleable minds. And instead of teaching us to code, they just trained us to use the service that were provided by others. When you think about HTML, CSS+, these are very simple language. But the design, the intention was that we want the general public to be a consumer. And the main issue that we're facing right now when you think about some of the negative outcomes and the kind of fear around technology and AI is around, obviously, privacy, is around the control of data, and is around this kind of digital surveillance control grid, right? But if you think about a future where each of us is a hacker, each of us understand how to program, we should be able to bring this technology at a local level. And essentially it's very much aligned to what you're doing with AppCity. It's about thinking about future where technology is brought back at the community level, and we move away from this system of centralized servers, which create big impact and problem for communities. And this is just going to grow, growing, in terms of the use of resources, water, and air, and so forth. But all of that has to come back to the local layer. Can you talk about some of the visions, solutions, and build on what we were just saying?
Yeah. One of the reasons why I love this panel is my work in Tulsa helped reinvigorate my belief in dreams as design material. Slavery and racial violence can be thought of as like the theft of a dream space. And in order to do the work that we did in Tulsa, we had to create space for people to dream. In any kind of urban planning, city planning project, there are templates, these kind of ready-made templates that, okay, you come in, you do this, you set up this kind of organization, there's going to be real estate development, it's going to benefit these very few people. And because of the history and the trauma in this community, we could not do it that way. The project had to almost be like a healing ritual. And we had to make space for people to be able to speak to anger that they still harbored. And once we were able to do that, I think people felt safe enough to articulate what they were dreaming of. And once they did that, it was very clear that what they wanted was community-owned real estate, not real estate development that was going to benefit a very small few wealthy people who would take that wealth out of the community. They actually wanted to do something where the real estate would benefit the community and money would stay in the community. And one of the things that we discovered is there are really no community-owned real estate initiatives in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. So one of the things that we did was we found other Black community-owned real estate development initiatives that had been around for decades in other cities in the United States. And we sent delegates from Tulsa out to those cities. There was some folks that went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We had others that went to Louisville, Kentucky, and we had some that went to New Orleans, Louisiana. And people came back with so many ideas that were like, okay, no, now we understand, the kind of work that we can do, what it takes legally to set up these kinds of vehicles where we can have real estate, but it's not going to just benefit the wealthy. And the manifesto that they ended up writing encoded all of those values of respecting our elders. They created an elderly council. They came up with a set of values that were all really based in collectivism and community ownership, and have decided that manifesto, as this project grows, that was just like the beginning, 30 community members. It continues to grow. Now there's a community development corporation that has been set up, but that manifesto has been sort of passed along. And they're inviting other people as they come into the project to honor that work, because a lot of that work was crowdsourced from the community.
Can you add something about Black imagination and the way that you use foresight as a tool of liberating that imagination.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Black imagination has always been a survival technology. I think dreaming in the Black radical tradition, it's very much a collective practice. It is said, I don't know how true this is, but I want to believe it's true, that the abolitionist Harriet Tubman, she suffered a critical head injury as a teenager. She got hit in the head with some kind of metal object, and it gave her narcolepsy. And she would often just like fall asleep in random places and talk about how during that time she would receive these dreams and these downloads. And you know, those kinds of dreams and downloads propelled her to do the work that she did on the Underground Railroad. And I really believe in that. I mean, when you are facing that kind of violence and attack, it is hard to dream. That is a luxury. So, you know, protecting the space for Black imagination on this project was really, really critical. Because again, you know, in any city planning process, there's these templates that you could just bring in and say, okay, we do it this way, this is how it's always been done, this is what, you know, Austin did, now we're gonna do that here. But we needed to create space for people to imagine something radically different than what existed. Yeah.
I want time for questions, so we're gonna move on. I want you, Sename, to speak about the way that you use technology in a local vernacular context, and then we can just build on questions with everyone.
Yeah, in reality, it's very simple to do. You are explaining right now what in our time everything is concentrated. It is a very logic movement of the history, shifting to social technologies to this industrial way of seeing the world. That was explained by the fact that you cannot perform social technologies at the scale. If you are at a small scale, if you take economy, by example, in every small communities, they can perform exchange without what we call profit. It is not donnant-donnant, it's don et contre don. If you if you need something, I will give it to you, but I'm not looking to have something. I'm not looking for the simultaneous of the exchange. I give to you, and I can I can use my debt, the debt you have, I can value it with another people. But this way of this technology, you cannot perform it at the scale of a city because you are not on the eyes of everybody at the big scale. So we moved to a very industrial way of managing people because of the scale. And industriality, the concentration of power, of production, etc., was the best answer to manage more and more big scale people. But what is happening right now is that we now have the technologies to perform social technologies at big scale because of digital tool we have, the distributivity of digital technology, etc. Yeah. So but the paradigm, as the paradigm is still industrial, Silicon Valley don't explore the potential to use new technologies to make social technology at the scale. So the paradigm is the problem. You need to take the potential of technologies on the hand of the Silicon Valleys and put it in small technologies to see what we can do with the same potential of digital tech, and it is what
One of the things that I was speaking about yesterday with Tracee is that when you think about when car came into the early 20th century, there was many ways of powering cars. There was many technology that were existing at the same time. And now we live in a mind where we just think of technology as only one thing. And when you think about all of this progress, they were the result of inventors, people creating technology in house, on community space. And I think this is very much what we need to come back to. We need to think about a future where we are farmers and we are hackers, and we bring technology at the local community level. Open for questions. we have mics? Mike. Yes, it's coming.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated everything that you offered. I just have a quick question for you, Tracee. It was such a vulnerable space that you were in, and it was a healing ritual that had to happen in order to dream. I'm curious, do they have a futures practice that's ongoing? Like, because sometimes we kind of do the featuring and then we kind of stop. And I'm wondering, because technology is evolving quickly, things are moving quickly, is there a practice in place, or was there something put in place in the manifesto to help them to keep dreaming and pushing and, evolving?
Great question. I'm not sure. But, I mean, we did so many activities and tools and storytelling that I would imagine, yes, there were some things that they did take forward. I was sort of seen as like this weird artistic lady who would come in and do like the imagination stuff. So I'm not sure, how much they took forward. But yeah, I do think that some of the practices, as they have continued to evolve the organization, they have done on their own, yeah.
Firstly, just thank you so much for this. I love the vantage points that you're bringing. And I just had a question, because we talk a lot about technologies in this space, and it tends to mean a certain kind of particular type of computer technology, particularly AI. But a lot of you spoke about spiritual technologies. And Sename, I appreciated your philosophical breakdown, actually, of the construction of modernity, because without naming, actually, the idea behind some of what we think, we don't see it. And I would say that in the third separation, it was not just the mind and the body, but it was the mind, the body, and the spirit. And it even exists in then the religious understandings that also shifted, so that there is a difference between the mind, the body, and the spirit, even in contemporary, like modern Christianity. But you then talked about Harriet Tubman and her dreaming, you talked about Ifa and divination. And so I'm wondering how you see the role of spiritual technologies in futurism today. Like, do you think that that's something that we need to explore more, firstly? And then secondly, is it too particular or subjective? So for example, I'm not a practitioner of Ifa. I can be in a space where somebody can do divination for me, but I don't fully understand because I'm also not even initiated. So I'm wondering, like, how would we use some of these technologies? Is it in your actual work, because you're all people who do things with this knowledges, is it something that we should actually be going deeper into and thinking more about? Or do you find it difficult because it's in a way almost too local to generalize?
I will answer. I think everyone can just chip in. But I think for me is that what attracted me in IFA is the fact that, again, what is the Earth? It's a big rock floating in outer space. And I think that's a factual truth, right? And the way we move into realities is kind of like we are sleepwalking as zombies through man-made stories and systems. And what was interesting to me in IFA is that it's a spiritual tradition, but it's a philosophy that anchors us into an objective understanding of our reality. So it's a philosophy that forces you to be fully present and to fully acknowledge realities through its different layers. And the question, the way that we design the ritual, so myself, I'm not an IFA practitioner. I'm spiritual, but I'm not initiated as well. But IFA is very much a science, and it's as well a philosophy. And it was a perfect way to be able to really bring all of these different dimensions into the conversation so that we could have fully embodied, fully present conversation on the future. And like we say, we go through like 5 questions: the body, the mind, the spirit, the heart, and the soul. So spirituality is very much present into it, but it's not spirituality from the sense of religion and socially constructed dogma. It's very much spirituality from the perspective of, as humans, and this is basically the way that we facilitate the question, is that as humans, we all have moments in our life when we feel out of balance. And we have rituals that we put in place in our lives to put us back into focus. Sometimes it's sleep, sometimes it's spending time with family, sometimes it's doing sport, listening to music, it's praying, it's meditation, it's all of these different things, right? And the question that we ask is that remembering the moment when you feel at your best. And so it's very much about thinking about what you feel in your body. If you could design a future, if you could design an ideal future where that feeling would be constant, what would it look like? So essentially, I use IFA and I use this principle as a way to create space where we can go back into our physical memory, you know, about how we felt in for these 5 iteration questions. And then from that, inviting them to really think in a meaningful way about new system in society. For example, some people will speak about sleep. Through that exercise, you came to the question of time, the importance of time, the importance of community. Some people will speak about the way that when they feel out of balance, water is cleansing. Some people will speak about when they go in nature, when they are surrounded by nature, they just feel centered, right? So people then look at this question from different perspectives, but then what we do for the exercise is that we have a collective conversation. So similar to what you were talking about, how through this exercise, people realize that we all want the same thing and we're all so similar, is that ultimately, and I've had 12,500 plus participants, so it's a very large, you know, pool. People all want the same thing. The answers are always the same, and then what you get are nuances. And I think what is really liberating and groundbreaking for the participants is to be in a room with strangers, people that you don't know, and to hear them saying the same thing that you feel or verbalizing it in a different way. And through the conversation, then people get to co-design and add elements and to think about, okay, this is interesting. So what about, so let's say a city where you'll have dreaming pod. So you could have a space in the middle of the day where you can go and sleep. You can go and be surrounded by sound. You can, you know what I mean? It's like then you start to design from that place. So to me, it's very much about looking at spirituality from the perspective of embodied feelings, where it centers you. And I think as well what it creates is that it allows you to have this conversation where everybody is an expert, right? And people don't have to use external system, external models, external reference, but they can all speak from the lived, embodied experience and all join in the conversation on the same footing. Feel to add in? Yeah.
You know, something that, this is going to sound maybe a little crazy, but there is something about the sort of Silicon Valley imagination that he was talking about, to me, that also feels like a kind of corrupted spirituality. And I think that, yeah, I don't think that there's this like special ancestral kind of spirituality that we need to go back to. All of it is spiritual. Some of it is just kind of dark and I don't want to do it. But yeah, I think if imagination really shapes the world, we can look at those who hold power. It reveals a kind of inner weather. And I have participated in, you know, futuring work or foresight work that was not as ritually grounded and ceremonial like this one in Tulsa, but it also feels like it is spiritual. We are calling things in, but it's not the things that I want to embody. Yeah.
Adding, because someone made a sign of time, you know, I don't know if you guys came across the Antichrist, you know, podcast series by Peter Thiel. And I think what you talk about spirituality, what you realize is that there are positive spiritual projects and there are dark spiritual projects. And it's very true that what we're seeing now with the dark enlightenment, you know, it's all embedded into a very different ways of looking at humans and a very different relationship to nature.